Denver International Airport held its breath. It was the kind of January night that made the mountains disappear, clouds pressing low against the plains, wind dragging sheets of snow across the glass walls of the terminal like something trying to get in. The last departure board of the evening had clicked over to a single word that meant everything was finished. Departed. Ethan Cole stood at the gate window and watched the taillights of the aircraft dissolve into the dark above the runway. He was still holding his boarding pass. He had printed it that morning in the break room at the garage, smoothed the fold flat with his thumbnail, tucked it into the breast pocket of the one-collared shirt he owned. Now the paper felt like a receipt for something he could not return. 34 years old. A single father. A mechanic who had spent 4 months saving every dollar that wasn't already spoken for by rent or groceries or the school supply list his daughter Mia brought home in September. He had told himself this interview in Seattle was different, that this time the numbers might finally work out. He had been wrong before. He was good at that. He tucked the boarding pass into his back pocket and turned away from the window. The terminal behind him was emptying a slow tide of people retreating toward rideshares, baggage claim, the long drive home. The lights overhead had that late evening dimness airports use when they are winding down. Not quite dark enough to signal abandonment, but enough to change the quality of the air. He needed to sit. He needed to think. He needed, more than anything, not to call his sister Diane and tell her what had happened. Because Diane would be kind about it, and that was the one thing he could not handle right now. He found an empty row near a vending machine and lowered himself into the molded plastic chair. That was when he saw the woman. He had almost made it. That was the part that kept running on a loop behind his eyes. The alarm had gone off at 4:30. He had made Mia's lunch the night before: peanut butter, apple slices, the little container of goldfish crackers she required, and set it in the fridge beside a note that said, "I'll be back Thursday. Call Aunt Diane if you need anything. Love, Dad," with a small drawing of a dog at the bottom because Mia always asked for it. He was a decent mechanic and a terrible artist. She loved the drawings anyway. His sister had arrived at 6 to stay with Mia through the school week. He had kissed his daughter's hair while she was still half asleep, smelled the shampoo she used, felt her small hand grip his sleeve for a second before she let go. He had stood in the doorway longer than he needed to. The drive to the airport had been fine until the exit near Pena Boulevard, where a jackknifed semi had turned 3 lanes into 1 and turned 40 minutes into 75. He had called the airline. He had been told the gate would close at 7:50. He had watched the clock on his dashboard the way a man watches a fire moving across dry ground. He had made it to security by 7:41. He had jogged down Concourse B in his dress shoes, which were a size he had owned since he was 28 and which had never quite fit properly. He had arrived at Gate B32 at 7:53. The jetway door was closed. The gate agent, a tired woman with kind eyes, had shaken her head before he had even finished his sentence. Policy was policy. They could rebook him on tomorrow morning's first departure. He could try for a hotel. He had stood there for a full 15 seconds, not saying anything. He was good at not saying things when the things he wanted to say would not help anyone. "That's fine," he had told her. "Thank you." He meant it. It was not her fault. It was not really anyone's fault, which was somehow the worst version of the situation. He had bought a black coffee from a cart that was already packing up and carried it to the row of seats near the vending machine. Outside, the snow had thickened from scattered flurries into something with more intention. A weather crawl on the suspended television showed a winter storm advisory through morning. Hotels near the airport would fill by 9 o'clock. He would call around in a minute. First, he needed to sit quietly and let the disappointment settle somewhere he could carry it. He looked at the vending machine. He looked at the window. He looked at the woman near the far end of the row who was pressing her thumb against a dark phone screen as though she could will it back to life. She was wearing a charcoal wool coat that reached her knees, the kind of coat that had been expensive once and still looked it. Dark hair, pulled back at the start of the evening and now loosened at the temples. She might have been 30 or a little older. It was hard to tell when someone looked the way she looked. composed in the way that meant she had been taught to look composed, regardless of what was happening underneath. What was happening underneath, Ethan thought, was something complicated. He was not particularly good at reading people, or so his sister told him. He was good at reading machines, the hesitation in an engine turning over, the particular vibration that meant one problem and not another. But he watched the woman and noticed things. The way she set the dead phone face down on the seat beside her and pressed both hands flat against her thighs, very still. The way she looked toward the exit doors and then away, then toward them again, the same sequence twice, like a calculation she kept running and could not solve. The single rolling carry-on beside her, no checked luggage tags visible. She was not waiting for a flight. All the flights were gone. She was not waiting for anyone to pick her up. If someone were coming, she would have looked toward the doors with a different quality of attention, anticipation, not assessment. She was working out what to do next, and from the look of it, none of the options were good. Ethan drank his coffee. He told himself it was not his business. He had his own problems tonight, a whole geography of them. And he was not the kind of man who inserted himself into strangers' situations without invitation. He had lived in Colorado long enough to understand that people valued being left alone, especially in distress. But there was something specific about the way she pressed her hands to her thighs. Flat, controlled, knuckles not quite white. It was the way Mia held herself when she was frightened, and trying not to show it when she had woken with a fever last winter. When she had heard the car accident on their street and not understood the sound. His daughter did not cry easily, had not since she was 4, and sometimes Ethan thought she had learned that from watching him, and he was not sure how he felt about it. He stood up. He fed $2 bills into the vending machine. He selected a bottle of water and a granola bar, the kind with the oats and the honey that were not too sweet, and he walked to the far end of the row and set them on the seat beside the woman without looking at her directly. "The coffee cart closed about 10 minutes ago," he said. "This is all I've got, but you're welcome to it." He sat down one seat over and looked at the window. She did not take the water right away. He did not expect her to. He watched the snow. A ground crew truck moved slowly across the apron with its yellow lights turning. The terminal had gone very quiet in the way airports get when the last crowds leave and only the infrastructure remains the hum of ventilation, the distant signal tones from a screen somewhere. After a while, she said, "Thank you." Her voice was even, not warm, not cold. The voice of someone deciding whether to say more. "I'm Ethan," he said. He did not offer a hand. He kept looking at the window. A pause. Then, "Rebecca." He nodded. He drank the last of his coffee. "Flight?" she asked. "Missed it." "You?" "I wasn't on one." That was honest, at least. He appreciated that she did not construct a story. "Hotel?" he offered. "I had an address." She stopped. He waited. He had learned that the right response to an incomplete explanation was usually silence. People filled silence with what they actually meant. Eventually, if you did not rush them. "My phone is dead," she said. "I don't have a charger." "I was going to." She stopped again. "I had a plan, and the plan fell apart. Plans do that." She made a small sound that was not quite a laugh. "Yes." He pulled his phone from his pocket and opened the Maps application. "There's a branch hotel about 8 miles east, off I-70. Not airport adjacent, so it might still have rooms." He turned the phone so she could see the screen without having to lean toward him. "If you call now, they might hold one." She looked at the screen, then at him. "My phone is dead. I know. You can use mine." Another pause. He understood what she was calculating, whether the offer was what it appeared to be, whether accepting it obligated her to something. He kept his expression flat. He was good at flat. She took the phone. She dialed. He listened to her speak to someone on the other end. Polite, precise, asking about availability and rates, a composure that sounded practiced, like someone accustomed to making arrangements under inconvenient conditions. She lowered the phone. They're full. He took the phone back, tried the next two options. She made both calls. Both full. Outside, the snow was no longer falling in separate flakes. It was falling in curtains. The airport's main security area had closed. A custodian moved through the concourse with a floor buffer, the machine's hum filling the empty space. A TSA supervisor walked the corridor once, checked a door, did not stop. The terminal would not officially close. Airports did not fully, but the usable areas were narrowing. Ethan had been in enough uncomfortable situations to know how these nights played out. By midnight, the remaining passengers would be consolidated near the main security checkpoint. The seats there were worse. The lights stayed on fully, all night, the kind of fluorescent brightness that made sleep impossible and made hours feel longer than they were. He thought about his options. His sister would let him sleep on her couch if he drove the 45 minutes to Arvada, but he would need to leave by 5 to get back to the garage for his 7 o'clock opener. The break room couch at the shop was available, and he had used it before. 15 minutes from here by freeway. He thought about the woman next to him. She was not telling him everything. He knew that. The address she could not go to, the plan that fell apart, edges of something larger she was keeping behind a careful expression. He did not think she was dangerous. He had worked with enough difficult people to sense the difference between someone running toward trouble and someone putting distance between themselves and it. Her stillness had that quality. He thought about what Mia had asked him once when she was 5. Watching him help their neighbor, Mrs. Holt, carry groceries up the icy front steps, while Mrs. Holt argued she could manage herself. Why do you help people when they say they don't need it? He had thought about it longer than a 5-year-old expected. Because they need it anyway, he had finally said. She accepted this with the seriousness she brought to all information. He took his keyring from his jacket pocket. 1 car key, 1 garage key, 1 apartment key. He worked the apartment key free. It was a standard brass key, nothing distinctive about it, worn dull at the edges from use. He set it on the seat between them. My apartment is 15 minutes from here, he said. There's a spare set of sheets in the closet above the washing machine. The deadbolt is stiff. You have to push the door in while you turn the key or it won't catch. Heat works. The couch folds out, but the mattress is decent. He found a pen in his jacket. He always had a pen. Habit from writing up service orders, and wrote the address on the back of the boarding pass he had not thrown away. He set it next to the key. My daughter is at her aunt's through Thursday. I'm going to sleep at my garage tonight. Rebecca looked at the key. She looked at the boarding pass. She looked at him. You don't know me, she said. No, I could be. I know. He stood up and picked up his jacket. If you don't use it, leave it at the front desk downstairs. They can hold it for me. He walked to the escalator. Rebecca Hartwell sat with the key in her hand for a long time after he was gone. The key was lighter than she expected. She turned it over once, looked at the teeth, set it flat in her palm. The boarding pass beside it said Cole, Ethan, Dancia, and had been printed that morning, the paper still crisp at the edges. She had not cried in 11 months. She was counting. She did not cry now either. But the pressure behind her eyes was there, the way it always was when something surprised her by being what it appeared to be. Simple and without agenda. She had been surrounded for most of her adult life by people whose generosity had terms, who gave things in ways that created obligations, who were warm when it cost them nothing, and precise when it cost them something. She had learned to price the generosity of strangers before accepting it. She could not price this. He had not asked her name twice. Had not asked where she was going or why the address she had was no longer safe. Had not looked at her coat or her carry-on or drawn any conclusions she could see. Had set the water down and moved 1 seat away, and that was all. She looked at the window. The snow was a solid white condition now, not falling so much as existing everywhere at once. A cab would cost her $40 she could afford but would need to account for. The cab would take 15 minutes to arrive in this weather, maybe more. She would arrive at his apartment sometime after midnight, alone, with a key given to her by a man she had spoken to for 20 minutes. In 12 years of working within the structures her father had built, the organization, the expectations, the careful network of mutual obligations, she had never once accepted something that did not come with a price she understood in advance. She picked up the key. She picked up the boarding pass. She looked at the address he had written. 4417, Larimer, number 2B. His handwriting was legible in the way that practical people's handwriting tends to be, not careful, not artistic, just clear, functional. She put both in her coat pocket and stood up. Outside, the snow kept falling. Cole's Auto and Small Engine Repair occupied a converted double bay on Walnut Street that Ethan had been renting for 6 years. The sign above the door was hand-painted, slightly uneven on the right side. Every few months he told himself he would fix it. He never did. He let himself in through the side door, hit the fluorescents in the bay, and stood for a moment in the smell of the place. Motor oil, rubber, the cold mineral smell of concrete in winter. It was the smell he had worked in since he was 19, when his uncle had first put a ratchet in his hand and explained that a torque wrench was not a thing you used by feel, but by measurement. His uncle had been right about many things. The break room had a couch that had been there when he took the space over. Orange, which he suspected meant the 70s, the cushions compressed into something technically soft but communicating no comfort. He had slept on it a dozen times over 6 years, burst pipes, ice storms. The night after his wife's funeral, when he could not make himself drive home to the apartment that still had her things in it, he pulled an emergency blanket from the supply cabinet and lay down with his jacket folded under his head. He thought about the interview in Seattle. He had prepared carefully, researched the company, a regional fleet maintenance firm expanding its Colorado operations, studied their service protocols, written down answers to anticipated questions. He had a decent case for why he was ready to move up from independent shop work to operations management. He had the experience. He had references. He had thought it was possible. It was still possible. Tomorrow's flight was available. He would call in the morning and rebook. He thought about the woman. Rebecca. The way she had looked at the key as if she were trying to identify what category of thing it was, as if kindness were a specimen she needed to classify before she could handle it safely. He hoped she had used it. He was asleep before he finished the thought. His phone woke him at 6:12. Outside the garage's small window, the sky was the flat gray of snow clouds, and the street below was white and untracked. He lay still for a moment, listening. Then he got up, made coffee on the 2-burner that lived on the break room shelf, and went out into the bay to look at the Ford sedan he was halfway through a brake job on. He worked until 8. Then his phone rang. The number had a 303 area code, but was not one he recognized. Ethan Cole? The voice on the other end was male, professional, the kind of careful neutral that trained executive assistants cultivate. Speaking. My name is James Whitfield. I'm calling on behalf of Miss Rebecca Hartwell. She'd like to express her gratitude for your assistance last evening, and she's asked whether you'd be willing to come to an address in the downtown area at your convenience today. Ethan set down the brake caliper he was holding. He considered the name Hartwell. He considered the phrase on behalf of. She's all right, he said. She's quite well, yes. He exhaled. He had not entirely known he was holding that concern until it released. She doesn't owe me anything, he said. I don't need. She's aware of that. A pause. She'd simply like to speak with you. If you're willing. He looked at the Ford's open brake assembly. He had 3 jobs today and a parts order to confirm and a rebook to arrange with the airline. He was booked through Wednesday at minimum. What address? He said. He wrote it down on his service order pad. 1700 Lincoln Street, 22nd floor. He knew the building. It was visible from the highway, one of the glass towers that had gone up during the downtown development push a decade ago, the kind of building that had a name rather than a number, and a lobby with a particular quality of light that made you aware of your shoes. He showered in the garage's utility bathroom, changed into the collared shirt he had been planning to wear for the interview, and drove downtown through streets that were quiet and still faintly white. He found parking 2 blocks over and walked, his breath visible in the cold. The lobby had a reception desk staffed by a young man who said, without any audible judgment, "Mr. Cole, 22nd floor. Miss Hartwell's assistant will meet you." He stood in the elevator and looked at his reflection in the brushed steel door. He looked like what he was. He did not think that was a problem. The 22nd floor was a single, large office suite with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked west toward the mountains, which this morning were hidden behind the storm's residual gray. The carpeting was the deep, neutral color of expensive offices. There were 2 assistants at desks near the elevator and a conference table beyond, and at the far end of the room, standing with her back to him and looking out the window, Rebecca. She turned when she heard him. He had known, somewhere in the back of his mind, that the wool coat was the coat of someone with a certain kind of life. But knowing it in the abstract was different from standing here looking at her in a well-fitted blazer with her hair arranged properly, the assistants moving around her with the particular efficiency of people accustomed to managing complex schedules. She looked entirely different and exactly the same. "Thank you for coming," she said. She crossed the room and shook his hand. Her grip was direct. "I'm sorry I wasn't fully honest with you last night." "You were honest enough," he said. A small pause. "Would you sit down?" He sat. She sat across from him. The full story took about 15 minutes. Her father was Lawrence Hartwell, who had built Hartwell Industrial Group from a regional fabrication company into a diversified manufacturing conglomerate over 40 years. Rebecca had run the company's operational divisions for the past 3 years. 11 days ago, a faction within the board, led by an outside investor who had accumulated a quiet, controlling position over 18 months, had moved to force a governance restructuring that would effectively remove both Hartwells from CERN, operational authority. The address she had in Denver belonged to a board ally she had been planning to meet. She had received word, 20 minutes before landing, that the meeting was no longer safe, that the investor's people knew she was coming. She had gotten off the plane with no plan, a dead phone, and no one in the airport she trusted. "I had my security team's number memorized," she said, "but I couldn't call without my phone. And I wasn't willing to ask an airport employee and risk someone knowing where I was." "So you were sitting there doing the math," Ethan said. "I was sitting there doing the math." He nodded. "And the apartment was exactly what you said it was." A brief pause. "The deadbolt was stiff. You have to push the door in. I know that now." She met his eyes. "I was safe. I slept." He had expected gratitude. He had expected it to be expressed in financial terms, an envelope, a check, something that would settle the account between them and allow both of them to go on with their separate lives. He had been preparing, quietly, to decline it. "I had my team research you this morning," she said. "I want to be transparent about that." He waited. "You have run Kohl's for 6 years. Before that, 8 years at a dealership in Fort Collins, 2 promotions. You have been the sole provider for your daughter since your wife died 4 years ago." She paused. "I'm sorry about that." "Thank you," he said. He meant it. "You were on your way to Seattle last night for an interview. I'm rebooking for tomorrow." "I know." She leaned forward slightly. "Hartwell Industrial has a facility outside Denver in Lakewood. We have been building out a mechanical operations center for our Rocky Mountain regional fleet. 48 vehicles, a mix of delivery trucks and specialized equipment for the fabrication plants. We have been looking for someone to run operations for 8 months. We have interviewed 11 candidates." He stayed quiet. "You handled a situation last night that required a quick decision, with limited information, about someone you had no reason to trust." She chose her words with care. "You made the right decision and made it without turning it into something larger than it was. You walked away without waiting to see if I'd use the key." "That is not common." "It wasn't complicated," he said. "Most people find it complicated." She opened a folder on the table between them. "The position is Mechanical Operations Manager. Fleet maintenance, staff coordination, vendor relationships, scheduling for our regional service contracts. It would require some retraining in our specific systems. We would cover that cost and your time during the transition. The compensation. She named a figure. Ethan looked at the window. The number, she said, was more than twice his current income. It was the difference between the apartment on Larimer and the kind of neighborhood Mia could walk to school in. It was the difference between the school supply list being something he planned for and something he just handled. He looked back at her. Why not one of the 11 candidates? Because I spent 11 months building a case against a group of people who acquired power by performing trustworthiness. She closed the folder. I would like to try hiring someone who demonstrated it. He said nothing for a long moment. I'd want to talk to your operations team, he said finally. I'd want to see the facility. I'm not going to say yes to something I haven't looked at. For the first time, she smiled. It changed her face in a way that was notable. That's exactly the right answer, she said. He canceled the Seattle flight. He toured the Lakewood facility on a Thursday afternoon, a clean, well-organized space. Newer equipment than he had worked with at the dealership, a maintenance team of 7 who seemed tired of being managed from a distance by someone who did not know the difference between a hydraulic lift and a pneumatic one. He asked specific questions. He listened to the answers. He asked the lead technician, a quiet man named Gary Ferris who had 15 years on him and knew it, what the biggest problem with the current setup was. Gary said, communication lag between the service schedule and the parts orders. Jobs were getting held up, waiting for parts that should have been on site 3 days earlier. Ethan said he had dealt with exactly that problem at Kohl's, and he described what he had done about it. Gary listened without speaking. When Ethan finished, Gary said, that would work here. He took the job. The transition took 6 weeks. He found a buyer for Kohl's, a younger mechanic named Perry, who had been renting the adjacent bay for 2 years and had been quietly wanting more space. The price was fair, not generous. Ethan had not tried to squeeze it. He trained Perry on the 2 long-term customer accounts that needed particular handling, wrote up documentation for the seasonal service schedule, handed over the keys on a Friday afternoon, and shook Perry's hand. He found an apartment in Lakewood, 3 blocks from a school that Mia had visited twice and liked for reasons that were specific and practical. The library was large, the playground had a climbing structure with 3 routes to the top, and one of the other girls in her class had a dog. Mia adapted with the completeness that 6-year-olds bring to change when it is explained to them honestly. She had questions mainly about whether Gary from the new place was nice, and whether the apartment had a dishwasher, and whether her father would still be able to come to school things, and Ethan answered each one directly. Gary was professional. The apartment had a dishwasher. School things were non-negotiable. He saw Rebecca twice in his first month at the company, once in a meeting where she presented the board, restructuring to the full operations staff, once in the parking lot when they had arrived within minutes of each other on a morning with fresh snow on the ground. Both times they spoke briefly. He had given her a key. She had used it and returned it, along with a handwritten note left on his kitchen table that said simply, "Thank you." I slept. She had not drawn a dog at the bottom. The governance situation resolved over the following months through legal channels and a contested shareholder meeting. Rebecca handled it with the same measured precision she brought to everything he observed. The investor's position was unwound. The board returned to a configuration that reflected the company's founding structure. None of that was Ethan's domain. His domain was the 48 vehicles, the 7 technicians, the parts inventory, the service schedule, and the communication lag that Gary had identified, which Ethan fixed in his 3rd week with a straightforward lead time tracking system that cost nothing and required only that everyone update a shared document. It was, as solutions go, not spectacular. It worked. On a Saturday in late March, the mountains finally visible again after weeks of overcast skies, Ethan took Mia to the park 3 blocks from the new apartment. The snow was mostly gone from the paths, patchy and gray at the edges, and Mia was learning to ride the bicycle she had gotten for her birthday. She was not afraid of falling. She fell several times and got back on without being asked to. He sat on a bench and watched her. A plane moved across the sky, very high, the sun catching its belly. He watched it until it was gone. He thought about the boarding pass sitting in the breast pocket of his collared shirt on the night he had stood at gate B32 and understood that the door was closed. He thought about the drive across a snow-filled city to sleep on an orange couch that communicated no comfort. He thought about a brass key, worn dull at the edges from use, set on a plastic airport seat without ceremony or expectation. He had not made a decision that night thinking it would change anything. He had made it because it was the right decision and because he had a daughter who watched how he moved through the world. And he wanted her to see someone who helped when helping was possible. Mia completed a full length of the path without putting her foot down, and at the far end she turned around and looked back at him with an expression of complete satisfaction. He raised his hand. She raised hers. Then she got back on the bike and did it again.